We're going to be talking about Jacob today, the story of Jacob, and it kind of made me think as I was preparing. It made me think about well, first of all, I was preparing the lesson, and then plus the start of the school year made me think back to whenever I was a first year teacher, and I had no idea what I was doing. So you go into the classroom, and I thought, you know what, we'll make the rules simple in my class. Okay, you don't let anything come out of your mouth that you wouldn't say to your mama. All right. I feel like that was a fairly realistic rule, right? Well, it didn't take me long to realize that some of my students say things to their mamas that I didn't say to my mom. In fact, whenever I would ask, "Yeah, do you talk like that at home?" They're like, "Yeah, I talk like that at home," and they do. They talk like that at home. So, they're different home environments, and a lot of how you're raised um, determines the type of character you are, whether it's positive attributes that you take from home, or different dysfunctions that we carry over into adulthood. Um, we have all these different sayings, right? Like father, like son, right? Or the apple doesn't fall too far from the
Tree.
tree, right? Yeah, and I've heard that a lot personally. Um, in my own life, also from some of you that have said that to me. But there's this aspect that the people that you're most intimate with, you begin to become like the people you're most intimate with. And so today we're going to be looking at Jacob. Last week, Dwayne took us through Abraham. We're going to be looking at Jacob, which, these Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are important figures in the old in the story of Scripture, because as God refers to himself, oftentimes he says, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So he keeps referring to these three men, the founders, the patriarchs of the faith, and that's who God chooses to identify himself with. And so today we're going to be looking at Jacob's story, and it's such a big story. There's so much packed into it that it was kind of difficult for me to focus on one aspect of it. This is a very rich part of Genesis, and I'm going to necessarily fly through a lot of things that might interest you, or skip over some things that you might have questions about, just because I want us to get an overarching view of this family, okay, of Abraham's family, of Jacob's family, of Isaac's family. So with that said, let me see if I could share my my thing with y'all. Okay. Are we able to see it?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right. So I have, the title is Jacob, a family divided, but let's look here. Let's just remind ourselves where we are. Okay, we're looking at the major stories throughout Scripture within this framework. Okay, creation, fall, redemption, new creation. So we are firmly in the fall category with the story of Jacob, but we don't want to just stay there as we read this narrative, as we go through. We don't want to stay in that one category. We want to see how it carries through with redemption and new creation. All right. So I have, like I said earlier, I do have a lot of slides today. It's mainly just Scripture. So I'm kind of curated what I want us to pay attention to. So we'll read it. We'll kind of talk about it a little bit, and then move on to the next section. So that way you're not having to flip through. But we will be in chapters 25 through about 35. of Genesis if you are interested. All right, so we start off the story of Jacob. It really just continues with Isaac, and we see that Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Okay. Now, if you remember last week, Abraham's wife Sarah was barren as well, and now we see Rebecca is barren, Isaac's wife. So we have this theme already with Abraham and Isaac of barrenness, and the world isn't as it should be. What should be giving life and joy and happiness into the world, it's not working. Okay, and so we're not able to create life on our own. So Isaac prays, and the Lord grants his prayer, and Rebecca, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? Right? So she went to inquire to the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Okay. So not only was she barren, and then all of a sudden her womb was opened up, but there's this proclamation, right? There's God kind of gives an insight as to how her children are going to grow and develop into nations. Now, Abraham was already promised a nation from his lineage, so we kind of see a continuation of that. But here, this is a little bit strange. We see, well, first of all, it's not uncommon for siblings to fight, right? But both are going to become nations, and the older shall serve the younger. So, in the Old Testament, there's this thing, or not just in the Old Testament, we see it today even in parts of the world, but this idea of what we call primogeniture. So, the first child, oftentimes the first male child, would receive, if not all the inheritance from the father, from the parents, then most of the inheritance. And so the fact whoever was born first received the majority of the wealth, the majority of the attention, and the expectations were placed on that child. Okay, and so we see here this switching of the narrative: the older shall serve the younger. So, so that notion of the firstborn as being the hope of the family, it's thrown into chaos a little bit. Okay, that expectation has been taken away, or at least been put into doubt. Okay, we'll see how that unfolds. So when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Okay, so just to kind of put this into picture form, Esau was a man's man. Okay, he was a skillful hunter. He went out in the fields. He really he fell in line with that gender stereotype of, a hunter and big and brawny. So you could see whenever he walked in, obviously there's no way to tell, but in my mind, I'm picturing Esau as 5 foot taller than Jacob, and barrel chested, and just he probably had a full on beard, and Jacob was probably smaller and scrawnier. He was a dweller of tents. He was quiet, right? And we see there that Rebekah loved Jacob. So Jacob probably spent a whole lot of time with his mom, right? I could see Esau picking fun at Jacob and calling him a mama's boy, right? Because Jacob doesn't fit into that mold per se of what a man should be back then. One of the field, strong, and this protector. Okay? Jacob was quiet, and he was skillful with words and cunning. So, and once again, so the brothers already, the two shall be divided. Okay, we see here Esau was what you would typically think of as as the firstborn of the hope of the family. He was strong, go out, he's valiant. Jacob was not what families expected to carry on the name. Okay, so already there's this tension between the two. And so when Jacob was cooking stew, right? So Jacob was probably a good cook, hanging out in the tent, hanging out with his mom. He probably learned how to cook really well. Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. And thus Esau despised his birthright. Okay? So, once again, we're seeing this family dynamic play out, right? So Esau comes in from the field and expects to be fed by his younger brother. Okay? That's what Jacob's role was, to feed Esau, to provide for him. But Jacob, he saw an opportunity, right? He knew his brother was exhausted, and being second in line, right? Not being the burly, brawny man, he used his wits. He used what he had at his disposal. And he said, "That's fine. Why don't you just sell me your birthright for this cup of stew and bread?" And Esau, we see he just sold it for a meal, sold his birthright to the meal. So he didn't really care about it. And so we can see here the tension between the two already growing a little bit more. All right, and this is just a line. This is an interesting line because I hadn't caught this before, but it shows some of the family dynamics of Isaac's house. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Okay. So everyone's probably heard a good in-law joke, right? Here we see Esau marrying Hittite women. So he's marrying from the realm. Okay. So what that means, to kind of put in context, is he's marrying from a region that had different values and norms probably than his family had. Because remember, Abraham was he's from a different region. For some reason, the name of that area is escaping my mind at the moment. But they're in a foreign land. They're sojourners. Okay, so they have the land that they live in has a different culture. They have different norms. They have different expectations. They have different ways of relating to each other. And Isaac, and remember, Rebekah is from Isaac's family, so she was raised with those family expectations and norms as well. And so Esau, he marries from the local region. Okay, he marries out, which we see as Israel develops into a nation, as God establishes the formal covenant with them in the land. God didn't want his people mingling with other nations per se, because not because they were less valuable as people, but because they did not value the things that God values. And so Esau marries um, out of the family, and so he brings these competing norms, these competing family values in, and we see here that they made life bitter for the in-laws. Okay, they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So Esau selling his birthright. He's marrying outside of the family, causing family strife. And they all live together. Okay, it's not like today where if you don't like your brother or sister and their in-laws or your parents, you have your own house. They all live together. So this family dynamic is just stewing. It's growing. You can feel the tension as you just read the words. All right, so we are skipping ahead a little bit. Once again, we're just kind of getting an overview. I'm just kind of trying to pick out some of the highlights here. And then we see, and then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me." So Isaac is an old age. He's about to bless his son, his oldest son, and because he wants to give him his family blessing before he dies. And one thing to note about blessings, in the ancient times, they were believed to have had agency. So blessings were not just words or things you get inside of a fortune cookie or a card. Blessings actually had agency to accomplish whatever their task was. Okay, so if I blessed you, that actually in the ancient time that was thought to have had a causal effect in my life. Okay, so Isaac is going to bless. His intent is to bless Esau. And what that blessing does is that actually comes into Esau's life and gives Esau blessing. Okay, so this is a big moment. This isn't just a nice conversation between a father and a son. This is a significant part of family history about to happen. Okay? And so we pick up in verse 26. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him. Okay. Now I cut out a little bit, but here Jacob came. Jacob is dressed up as Esau. He's sneaking in, and so Jacob comes in. Isaac kisses Jacob, but because he can't see, he smells, right? And the garments are Esau's. And so Isaac blesses Jacob. He says, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed." And then he blesses him, saying, "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be anyone who curses you, and blessed be anyone who blesses you." And so we see in this blessing echoes of what God had told Rebekah earlier, that the older would serve the younger. In fact, Isaac, unbeknownst to him, is actually making that come true. He says, "Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." So we see the prophecy that God gave Rebekah coming true here. And not only that, but we see echoes of God's covenant blessing to Abraham, where he says, "Cursed be anyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." This is a bit ironic because his own son, Esau, who he was trying to bless, winds up cursing Jacob in just a little bit because of Jacob stealing his blessing. Esau starts to curses his brother, and yet Isaac here is saying, "Cursed be anyone who curses you." So we see this warped family dynamic here, right? It's unfolding before our eyes. Okay, this is good soap opera or telenovela material. So we continue on, and Esau, he figures out, right? Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father?" Okay, remember, the blessing has causal agency. It's a big deal. This is what he's been waiting for. This has been what he's been waiting for all his life. And so he's desperate. "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me. Even also, oh, my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said, "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high." So Esau is going to have a rough go at it. He's going to have a hard life. "By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother." So Esau literally lives on a knife's edge. "But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." And that's interesting. We're going to come back to that a little bit later in the story. Okay. So he doesn't have two blessings. In fact, he gets the reverse, right? He's going to serve his brother, and he's going to have a hard, lean life. And so, I don't know about you, but that's not exactly the way I would have pictured, God's prophecy unfolding that he gave Rebecca early on. That's not exactly how I would think of God's will as coming about, right? And yet God uses Jacob's craftiness, his sneakiness. By the way, not just Jacob's, but Jacob and his mom's. We kind of cut that part of the story out. Isaac and Rebecca are playing favorites. Okay? Isaac clearly favors Esau, and Rebecca favors her son Jacob. And so we even have these parents, husband and wife, pitted against each other based on their own favoritism of their kids. And so this family is hanging on by a thread. It's barely holding together, and yet the trajectory they're on so far is coming about it's fulfilling the prophecy that God made. So there's this weird intermingling between our growing dysfunction and God's sovereignty. So carry on. Esau hated Jacob, rightly so. He snuck him out of his blessing and his inheritance because of the blessing from which his father had hoped or had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother." Then Rebekah said to Isaac, so skipping ahead, then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I loathe my life because of this Hittite woman. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be?" Okay. So Esau is planning on killing Jacob out of revenge. Okay. So there's a blood feud. But Esau wants to wait till his dad dies so that he doesn't upset his dad. Rebecca heard this, and her favorite son, she wants to get him out. And so what she does is she uses her not in-laws, what are they? Not step. You got to help me out here. I'm having a blank. Daughter-in-laws. There you go. Daughter-in-laws. So Rebecca's using her daughter-in-law's dysfunctional relationship with her and Isaac to try and get Jacob out, to give a valid excuse. That way Jacob doesn't just run away and have that haunting over him. So Rebecca manipulates Isaac into blessing Jacob and sending him off to their homeland so that he can get a wife. And so Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him. You must not take a wife for the Canaanite women. Okay, they're driving your mother and myself crazy. All right, go to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban. Okay? And so through a cunning, Rebekah gets Jacob out, but also gets him to marry a member of the family, someone who has similar values. And then Jacob obeyed his father and he left. Okay? So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Jacob his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, this woman, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. So Esau even goes and adds another wife, one from his family, to his own wives. So he has multiple wives at this point, just to please his parents. Okay. So, and I'm gonna kind of skip through some of the other slides, but I hope we can see here as the story goes on. This is not necessarily a story for emulation, right? The lives of Isaac and Jacob, two of the patriarchs of our faith. It's not necessarily something that we're commending to follow, and yet we also see that God's bringing about His purposes through them. So Jacob goes and he finds this beautiful woman, Rachel, and he works for 7 years for her. And they seem like just a few days because of the love he had. And it sounds sweet, and it is a little bit, but then we see here Jacob going to Rachel's father, Laban, and says, give me my wife that I may go into her, which is just a euphemism for something else. For my time is completed. Okay. So give me my prize. But in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Laban tricked him. So the trickster gets tricked. And Laban said, it is not done so in my country to give the younger before the firstborn. Okay, we see this preference to the firstborn again. Leah was the firstborn, Rachel was not. Just like Jacob was not the firstborn. And so Jacob gets Leah. And then he has to work more for Rachel. And we see down there and at the bottom in verse 30, Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah and served Laban for another 7 years. Okay. So Jacob is picking favorites amongst multiple wives, amongst sisters. Like I said, this is perfect soap opera material. Okay, someone needs to adapt this for our modern. No, we don't need to adapt that for our modern television audience, but this is stuff that you watch on late night TV. Okay, so as time goes on, Jacob even estranges himself from Laban, his father-in-law, and so that he has to flee from Laban. Okay, so at this point in the story, Jacob has burned bridges with his home, with his brother. He had to flee from there for his life, and now through his dealings, he's alienated himself from Laban, his father-in-law. So now he has to run from Laban, his father-in-law. And so he's going back to his home, and he's sending gifts to his brother to try and appease him, so that whenever he gets home, maybe he won't be as angry at him and he won't kill him. And so we see in the story as Jacob is going back to his homeland, because he is literally at this point in time a man without a home because of his own dealings, because of his own craftiness. He's tangled a web for himself and he's caught and he can't get out. And so what he did is we read the same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford to Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else he had. So he sent his family and everything that he had across the stream, and Jacob was left utterly alone. Because at this point in the story, that's exactly where Jacob is. He's alone. And what's worse is he knows he's alone because of his own doings, right? It's one thing to be alone with circumstances outside of your control, right? One thing to be caught up in a mess that you didn't make. But Jacob made this mess by alienating his brother, his father-in-law, by picking favorites between his wives, by taking other wives, by choosing favorites than his kids. Jacob made this mess, and he knows it. And he was utterly alone. And it's almost a truism that when we are at our rock bottom, when we are utterly alone, when the night is darkest, that is when we are most receptive to hearing God's voice, to seeing him, and to realizing our need. And so Jacob is about to have a conversion experience. Okay, that night, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint, and he continued to wrestle with him. Okay? Jacob is so desperate, he's wrestling with this man. We don't know how the circumstances came about, right? But Jacob is wrestling all night. And so I used to do martial arts, and I do competitive sparring events. And let me just tell you, they were 1 minute. You would fight for 2 1-minute bouts. You'd have like a 1 minute break in between. And after about 15 seconds of the first bout, you were exhausted. After the second bout, you were sucking wind on the mat. Okay. He's wrestling all night. It just shows us Jacob's desperation. And so he's fighting through exhaustion. He has nothing else. He has nothing else but to wrestle with this man and to ultimately try and gain his blessing. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So Jacob knew this man was someone special. Okay? And the man said to Jacob, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with man, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. Okay. So remember, blessings have causal agency, but also blessings come from someone greater to lesser. Okay, the Father blesses the Son doesn't bless the Father. And here Jacob is receiving a blessing from this man who we find out is God himself. Okay. Now, I don't want you to take this passage out of context and necessarily think like, okay, well, I have to if I really just keep asking God for what I want, or for what for this one thing, then God will bless me. That's not necessarily what this passage is saying. Okay. Remember, Jacob was at rock bottom. He didn't have anything else. And he wrestled with God because he knew if he did not have God's blessing, then he had nothing. Okay. And that's precisely what you and I do. Okay. Every day, whenever we wake up, that should be um, the cry of our heart. Father, if I do not have you, I have nothing. And we wrestle with that truth. We wrestle with that inner reality, that realization. Um, we have to have that same wrestling every day that Jacob did with God all night, realizing that apart from God's blessing, there's nothing to be had, because everything we touch turns to dysfunction and mess, just like everything Jacob touched turned to dysfunction and mess. And so God realizes, yes, God gave Jacob the opportunity to show that, yes, you realize that you need me above all else. You need me above your safety. You need me above, um, even above your family, right? You need me first and foremost. And God gives Jacob a new name. His name is Israel. Israel. And so we see in this family, um, this family is highly dysfunctional. Okay. Um, it was really hard for me as I was reading through not to psychoanalyze, uh, as the counselor I am. I really just had to kind of read the story, but um, it's a fascinating story of how to fail at each and every stage. And yet, um, we see here that uh, Isaac and Jacob are mentioned in the Hebrews chapter 11, which is considered kind of like the hall of faith, right? These are the hallmarks of faith. The saints that went before, these are our examples. We see in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20 and 21, um, that Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the future in faith. Okay? Isaac believed God and his promise that he received from God, and he blessed Jacob and Esau in faith that God would fulfill that promise. And by faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed the sons of Joseph, and worshipped. And he worshipped God as he was dying, as he was leaning on his staff. In his last days, he worshipped. Okay? And so, um, remembering the story of history, right? Creation, fall, redemption, new creation. As Jacob wrestled with God in the desert, he started his redemption moment. He clung to God. He didn't cling to his own intellect, his own cunning, his own skills. He clung to God, desperate for his blessing. And we see here, within God's family tree, uh, there are two ways of life in this story. Okay? There's our way, um, and we see there's lots of examples throughout the story, like primogeniture, favoring one child over another. God's way, we see Jesus is the firstborn, so he is the first over all creation, which means that he has the right to inherit everything. And yet, what does Jesus do as the firstborn? He turns and he shares all of his blessing. He doesn't hoard it. In fact, he gives it away. Our way in division and favoritism, just like Isaac favored Esau, Rebekah favored um, Jacob, Jacob favored Rachel. Um, God's way is self-giving love. Instead of picking favorites, you actually give yourself to others entirely. Our way, their way, polygamy, just taking what you want, right? More than one wife, satisfying your own need to produce offspring and heirs, making your name great by expanding your family. Here we have the bride of Christ. Okay? We are the bride of Christ. We have the one true husband who will always satisfy us and look after us. We have jealousy. We have service. There are two families. Family our way, we can join God's family. Self-promotion or humility. We see all these themes over here on the left in Jacob and Abraham, Isaac and Jacob's family. Over here on the right, we see God still redeems even through our own mess and offers us a chance to join him. And so as members of God's new family, and God did bring about blessing through Jacob, through his lineage, even though Jacob made a complete mess, God is bigger than that mess, and he is faithful to bring about what he wants. We can partner with him to bring about his peace and love to our broken world. And we can bring about his peace and love in our own family, within our friends, within our workplace, and hopefully the world at large. So with that said, let me just close out the teaching part in prayer, and then we'll share. Father, we thank you that you had a purpose, and that you bring about your purposes even through our own dysfunction, through our own failures, through our own selfishness. You are sovereign over that. You are able to bring about good even through our bad. Teach us how to be members of your family and to bring about your peace and love into the world. Amen.